prize, the chieftains wanted only un drapeau tricolore for themselves, just like the one displayed for Moana. The admiral had to think that his Pacific gunboat diplomacy was much easier than dealing with England, Spain, or Prussia, who placed no value on the fabric of his blue, white, and red flag. Complications arose, however, when the Taiawa chieftain refused to return Moana's wife. According to Radiguet, quote, toward the end of the month, after Melville had arrived in Nukuhiva Bay, Dutitoir and his entourage rowed out of Nukuhiva Harbor west to the neighboring bay of Hakaui to supervise the release of the hostage bride. She was at first reluctant to return to the rotund Moana, but a Catholic missionary helped change her mind. Radiguet rejoiced that this marriage of the Tei king and a Taipei girl would prevent war between two belligerent tribes. During the weeks before his desertion, Melville visited Hakaui several times, and his experiences there crop up in chapters 4 and 30 of Taipei. We know his reports are not invented because they correspond so well to similar descriptions in Max Radiguet's 1860 memoir, Les Derniers Sauvages, published 14 years after Taipei. So Melville couldn't possibly have gotten his images from Radiguet. Radiguet's perspective as an imperialist functionary helps us assess the elasticities of Melville's mind as he grew from a disinterested Montaigne sailor to an advocate of island culture. Radiguet himself, a gifted writer and passable artist, shared with Melville a love of the picturesque, an aesthetic that shaped their responses to island life and landscape both together. Like Melville, Radiguet was drawn to what both call the, quote, strange in island culture. That is, inexplicable differences between Western and Polynesian minds that nevertheless gesture toward commonality. In relating the return of Moana's princess bride, Radiguet describes their nuptial procession as it advances through the valley of the Taiawas to Hakaui Bay. He observes a priestess massaging an arthritic chief to remove some god of pain from his limbs. He passes a group of mourners who chant a monotonous dirge with tear-swollen yet strangely indifferent eyes over bodies now wrapped like mummies, placed in canoes and made ready for the next world. Similarly, in Taipei, Melville reports a priest rubbing his mysteriously aching leg, not in Hakaui, but in Taipei Vai. He also describes the chanting of mourners, how he stumbles upon mummies tucked in canoes. These and other overlapping details in Radiguet's and Melville's narratives give us some confirmation that Melville was not inventing, but reporting details. Reflecting back on the picturesque mixture of sights, sounds, and odors in Hakaui, Radiguet concludes that the valley's, quote, strange assemblage of gaiety, suffering, and indifference seemed to him a true and complete expression of Polynesian life, end quote. A strange assembly of a gaiety, suffering, and indifference. Similarly, Taipei is Melville's earliest attempt to grasp the bizarre insouciance of the picturesque, as Radiguet put it. But unlike Radiguet, who notes the strange assemblage and moves on, Tamo, as Melville calls himself in Taipei, persists in pursuing the strange in the Polynesian picturesque. He would later identify this same, quote, strange indifference of being in Pip, Dagu, cannibals in general, and whales in Moby Dick. Melville's and Radiguet's opposite descriptions of their arrival on the festive day trip. Separate, not opposite, separate descriptions. And sometimes I write and I can't read my writing. Separate descriptions of their arrival on the festive day trip to Hakaui are also similar. Again, Radiguet's description enables us to authenticate Melville's details. Disembarking from the Admiral's gig into Hakaui's shore, Radiguet seeks shelter from the stifling beach in the cooler nearby woods and follows a river which, in quote, in the vicinity of its mouth enlarges into a pond, étange, so peaceful, so shady, ombragé, that one expects to see emerging from the darkness of the foliage the usual resident of the royal pools, the bassin royal. Listen now as Melville describes his own arrival on the same beach at the same time. The sailor, his captain, and other mates row the distance from Nukuhiva Bay in scorching heat. Leaping onto the shore once they enter Hakaui Bay, leaping onto the shore as the boat hits the hot sand, Tomo runs for the woods to slake his thirst and, quote, plunges, diver fashion, into the recesses of the first grove that offered. He describes the, quote, gurgling, trickling, liquid sounds as he enjoys the shade baths of Tior, which is the word he uses for Taiwan. Melville's shade baths and Radiguet's royal pools are the same shady ponds situated at the mouth of the same river, emptying into the same bay in late June 1842. But an important difference is that in this chapter 4 episode, Melville adds a political dimension to the island picturesque. Melville reports seeing Le Petit Thouars standing in full regalia beside the ancient king of Tior in, quote, all the nakedness of nature. The French admiral represents the final product of, quote, progressive civilization and refinement, whereas the, quote, simple islander has not advanced one step in the career of improvement. Even so, of this politicized picturesque tableau, Tomo wonders subversively, quote, may not the savage be the happier of the two, end quote. Now, Melville claims that the, quote, picturesque grouping of the mingled throng of soldiery and natives is an impression that will never be obliterated from his memory. But to mollify readers, he also claims that he made these, quote, philosophical reflections while munching on a banana. Melville's subversive picturesque is defanged by his self-effacing humor. In effect, what Melville is doing in chapter 4 is still using the vocabulary of imperialism, savage, sauvage, to describe the issues of happiness and civilization. However, a more serious version of Hakaui occurs at the end of Taipei in chapter 30. A digressive chapter added late in the writing process. The chapter begins with birds, segues to tattooing, and moves on to taboo. We might dismiss this digression as mere filler if it were not for certain recollected details popping up in the chapter. Melville reports that Marquesan birds are sacred to all Nukuhiva islanders. Killing them is taboo. However, Tomo's unprincipled Captain Vangs, that's the name Melville gives to his captain, is a profound decimator of birds. He likes to take pot shots at birds with his fowling piece. In retrospect, Melville hints that his own Captain Valentine Pease, the real man, had gone bird hunting during multiple visits to Hakaui. The islanders are aghast and will not permit the murderous captain to drink from any stream. His now tabooed lips would pollute their water supply. More of the strange of taboo. But why does Melville digress this way and so late in his process? Chances are the first draft of his narrative had run short. He needed factual chapters on tattoo, taboo, and other topics to lengthen his book and validate the authenticity of his point of view. He plumbed his memory for more material and recalled Captain Pease's violation of island taboo. Melville could have revisited chapter 4 and added his captain's taboo killing of birds to the strange picturesque of the Glen of Tayar episode, and therefore complicating and letting his image grow about the imperialist consciousness that he was displaying. But